but you also have to keep this space of doubt open, which is a good thing because it's not like your doubt's going to go away anyway, so you can figure out how to make use of it.
I want to write what I don't know how to write. That's what keeps me going. I'm not at all interested in replicating my patterns. And I want to be as many artistic selves as I can. That's in this like the great adventure of this. I think that's where the great pleasure of being an artist is, making yourself up over and over.
The other day, Adrienne Rich came to Rutgers to speak, and she was talking to my undergraduate students who were of her. And here's this poet, she's 80 years old, she's published 19 books of poems, the first one came out in 1951, 4 major books of essays, and my students say to her, "Are you afraid of anything?" And she said, "I'm afraid of everything." And she's 80, and she's done all that work, and she's still scared. So it was heartening.
Next question. Somebody had their hand up over here. Okay.
Your reading of the last poem that was sort of unfinished made me wonder about this. I'm assuming when you're writing that you're reading aloud, and I wonder what the difference is for both of you between that experience of reading aloud by yourself and then testing something when there are people listening.
Well, you're right that you're sounding it, or I'm sounding it to myself at the desk all the time, and sometimes subtly in your head, and sometimes a little more actively. But it's always a different thing to speak it to an audience, because I think part of me is then listening with you. It becomes a different act. It becomes an act of communication instead of sort of speaking to a mirror. So I hear things that are problematic, or that go on too long. And that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to do that, because that poem, it's a commission for the New York Times, right, for that occasion. So I've got to turn it in like in a couple of days. And this was useful to me because there are just some places where I just want to chuck that, chuck some things. And even as I was reading it, I caught some words that seemed unnecessary. I heard some other things that I think maybe go on too long. So I learned from doing this. It's very useful to be able to read all these new poems at their various stages of completion and hear what I still need to pay attention to.
Honestly, once something is fully or more or less fully formed, it doesn't even feel like my work anymore. I feel like that was a self who wrote that maybe a year ago, and I'm just the interpreter. I just try to listen to what's there, but it almost feels like reading someone else's work, reading the work of another published writer. Maybe that's how I trick myself into doing this. It seems to make something. It isn't yours.
I can testify that 2 guys actually made it to Philadelphia, but I never made it there. One of the things that I noticed about with both of you, your writing has this interesting sense of place and specificity and geographical specificity, and which obviously has a very interesting way to place the way, as individuals, we happen to be reacting to it because I'm hearing the poem about it. I'm thinking, I really want to be in Palo Alto at this moment. And I wonder if you could sort of comment just in a very general way on this subject of the role of place in both of your writings. I mean, this is something I'd like to hear more about.
For me, it has to do with, I think poetry's project is to give voice and give form to the inner life. The inner life happens in the body, and the body is always somewhere. So if you were going to capture a sense of presence on the page, that seems to me the only way that I know how to do that is to position myself or position the subjectivity in the poem in the physical world in some way. So I'm responding to things, and things are providing the vehicles of feeling. Good description is as much about the person who's doing the looking as it is about what's being seen, right? And so as we're representing the world, we're representing ourselves seeing the world and feeling about the world. So those two things seem to me like totally intertwined.
It used to be really, really important to me to evoke a literal place in the world. My first novel is set in South Florida, even though I hadn't ever spent that much time in South Florida. The second book, Famous Diller, is mostly set in southern New Jersey, and I needed those literal, concrete places in the world in order to imagine. I think what I'm doing now is sort of less, they're more interior spaces, even though they depend upon some sense of geography and the literal. I mean, you know, Two Guys is mentioned in that last piece, but it's not working terrific. The piece isn't working terrifically hard to say Two Guys is a department store that is based in Paris and New Jersey. It's an imaginative space. I hope that makes sense.
I was reading your article in APR a couple of years ago about experience you had in some classroom or some space where you were clapping.
Yes, yes.
And I was wondering if you could repeat a couple of stanzas of that for us.
Sure. Yes. I was at Yaddo, the artist colony, and I met this Spanish painter who doesn't paint anymore. He makes videos, and he did this amazing video project, which was he would get you in a room with a camera, and you would sit down, and you were supposed to clap. Those were the only instructions. Clap as long as you want to. And I thought, well, this is kind of stupid. Okay, I'll do this. See what happens. And I got possessed by the act on clapping, and felt that I was, I don't know, I felt that I was meditating, that I was praying, that I was singing, that I was mourning, and this went on for quite a while, and I sort of lost track of time, and finally I stopped. And I asked him how long I had been clapping, and he said 38 minutes. So really, I had no idea that just that action could become this sort of interior performance. So I wrote a poem about well, at least it's partly about that experience, called Theory of the Sublime. Well, it's a big, huge poem, but this is the ending of the poem. And when I come to a complete stop, the silence seems extraordinarily firm and authoritative, and Carlos rises up from behind the tall chair where he's been hiding to nod his head approvingly, to indicate that something has happened here. And in a while, I ask how long I've been clapping, shaking out my stinging hands, and Carlos looks at his watch and says, 36 minutes, the room crackling with accusation or prayer, to what thrills and defeats us, defiance and applause. This poem is called Theory of the Sublime. Part of the pleasure of going to such places is the opportunity to collaborate with other artists and to be asked to do something like clap as long as you can. Because, I would never do that unless I was asked to. So it was remarkable. I recommend it.
Can I ask what you think about translation, especially given so many languages now, the world community is quite far.
I personally have done very little. I've translated some of Horace's Odes from Latin, but I speak a little Spanish and worse French, but not really well enough to be much of a translator. I'm lucky enough to have translators, a Spanish translator in Chile, who's great, and we have read together there in Santiago, and the most interesting thing about that to me was that he said he had to work very hard to make the poems not rhyme excessively because of this. Spanish has a wonderful propensity to make this beautiful chiming rhymes. If he overdid it, the poems became sing-song and sort of ridiculous. So he had to control the tone by restricting the rhyme, whereas in English this is not a problem that we have, right? So the two of us read together, and I would read a sentence and he would read a sentence, and it was a very interesting back and forth. Just at the moment, I have a translator in Mandarin Chinese. This presents a problem for the poet you translated into Chinese or Polish, and you look at it and you think, great. Sure, it's fine. One of the challenges for the Chinese translator, it turns out that my name had not been translated into Chinese. And when it had appeared in newspapers, it had been represented phonetically, which is one way you could do it with Chinese characters. But she didn't like it because the particular character that represented part of my name, she said, was something with many stalks that's too feminine. Which I found extremely difficult to visualize. So no, we don't want that. So she redid it. It's like duo. I can't do the tones, but it's basically like duo-di. And duo-di referred to the strong words coming from the emperor. It's sort of actually just a serious word about translation. A little bit of crisis moment in American letters because there is so little translation being published. Quite a large number of books written in the United States go outwards around the rest of the world, but a remarkably tiny number come this way. And it's one of the reasons for our national ignorance, frankly, and xenophobia. That we don't know. We don't read the testaments of subjectivity from other parts of the world. And so for us to turn to translations such as the beautiful work of the Palestinian poet Muhammad Ali, to read Mahmoud Darwish, to read poets from all over the world whose perspectives may be quite different than our American lives, is so crucial for us, and we have limited opportunities to do so.
Trying to translate here so they know we know, and you would just play the desire, about the conflict that people is having.
It's crucial work.
Paul, could you talk about writing at the edge of several different genres?
Yeah. It's, I think this new work is really sound-based, much more sound-based than anything I'd ever done before. I think I'd always been interested in sound because I have a background as a musician, but I always started with image and description, and then from image and description, character would develop. And this is obviously less interested in developing characters and much more interested in the musical phrase. So it really is about, it's groping in the dark for the right sound. And each of those pieces probably has 50 or 60 drafts. I mean, a lot of them are raw for the longest time. And I'll walk away from something or run or turn my mind in a different direction and go back to my desk and it will come in one sitting. But it takes a lot of work to make it sound easy. So I think they want to think like poems. I'm clearly a frustrated poet, but for whatever sick, screwed up reason, I need to have the space of a line. Actually, honestly, a few of them are lineated, but I feel like I'm doing a naughty thing for some reason. I sort of want the piece to reveal itself to me before I can name it as fiction or nonfiction. I think all the pieces you heard tonight are, for the most part, it's all memoir, it's all nonfiction. But some of the pieces in the collection are invented. Talk image to image. I'm really interested in making a collage with this book.
I think we have time for one more question.